So I've got 3 questions that I want to ask atheists, and these aren't gotcha questions.
Why do I not believe you?
Hey everyone, JL here, and welcome back to Bridge the Divide, where I examine irrational beliefs, the irrational behaviors that follow, and how we, with education, rationality, and reason, can bridge the societal divides that they create. So I'm back with another round of theists posing questions to atheists. This time, I've pulled together 3 short videos from 3 separate creators, which means we have a lot of ground to cover. So let's kick this off with a look at our first creator, Thomas Thorogood, over at the channel Stir and Fry. Thomas describes himself as a Christian guy who composes film music. Let's dive in and see what he's got for us.
Welcome to Stir and Fry. I've been thinking about 3 questions I'd like to ask atheists, that is, people who don't believe in God.
Well, it's good that you have questions, Thomas, but given prior experience, I'm going to suspend judgment on just how much you've actually thought about them.
These aren't meant to be gotcha kind of questions.
I really hope not, because those are just the worst.
I'm just genuinely interested in your answers, so feel free to write your answers in the comments below the video.
While that's always a way to go about this, I prefer to respond to these in video format, so that all of us together can get a really good sense of the intellectual dishonesty and ignorance that tend to inspire these questions. That's not to say that Thomas's will follow the same formula, it's just that as of late, my optimism has been a little hard to maintain going into these things.
So without further ado, here's question 1. Where do you find meaning in life?
Wait just a moment. Atheists can find meaning, purpose, or value in the exact same things that a Christian can. Atheists just don't believe in a God. So I'm kind of curious as to how this question is in any way relevant to the atheist position.
What matters most to you? What are the things that matter most to you in your life?
So is this more of a get-to-know-you question? You know, because that's pretty intimate for a first video. I mean, come on, buy a self-promotion whore a drink first.
This is probably a good question for all of us to reflect on. Question 2. Let's get more explicitly.
Ooh, naughty.
Theological.
Aw, you got me all excited.
If there is a God, what would he have to do to prove his existence to you?
Okay, this is actually a pretty good question, and the answer may vary depending upon who you ask. Speaking for myself, given the philosophy of truth that I adhere to, and that I hold to the typical legal and scientific standards of evidence, I can honestly say, I don't know. And that's because if an entity suddenly appeared before me, all glowy and shiny, and in a booming voice claimed that it was God, does that mean the entity is in fact God? No, it doesn't. For instance, by what methodology would we be able to determine the difference between a sufficiently powerful enough entity that showed up claiming that it was God?
What does God need with a starship?
And the Abrahamic God itself?
You're not God!
Yes, I am, Jesus!
Truthfully, we wouldn't be able to, because currently no such methodology exists. We would need actual evidence of such an entity existing first before we could even begin formulating a methodology that could determine whether such an entity was lying or not about who it was. And that doesn't even take into consideration that this hypothetical entity wouldn't be powerful enough to manipulate reality to the point that we wouldn't be able to determine that. It's the same reasoning why, in a world of David Blaines and Penn and Tellers, that when someone walks up to you claiming to be God and performing tricks that seem to defy reality, you don't automatically drop to your knees in abject supplication to them. So I honestly do not know what would convince me outright that the Abrahamic God exists. But I can say that if it does exist and possesses even a modicum of the attributes that you think it does, then that entity you call God does know infallibly infallibly what evidence would convince me, and it has thus far chosen not to present it. And just in case your mind goes there, Thomas, if your God requires that I commit myself to confirmation bias, that my belief must necessarily precede the evidence in order to accept its existence, or if my faith is somehow a metaphysical necessity for its existence as opposed to my objective knowledge, then honestly, that is one weak-ass God you're worshipping.
Question 3. Do you want the Jesus story to be true?
Damn it, Thomas, you were doing so well avoiding dishonesty. When will you theists understand that we are maintaining intellectual honesty here? Which means atheism has nothing to do with what we want to be true, and has everything to do with what is actually true. Just wanting the Christ narrative to be true in spite of all the contradictory evidence is just an emotional appeal, and our personal feelings do not matter when it comes to determining truth. But what's really problematic is that your question implies that atheists are dishonest from the jump, which demonstrates that you really don't understand what atheism is or what it entails.
You may know the Jesus story already, you may think you know the Jesus story already, but in essence, Jesus shows us that God demonstrates who he is most clearly, nailed to a piece of wood, bleeding and praying for his enemies, laying down his life for us in order to be with us forever, because he is love.
Yeah, the imagery is horrifying and grotesque. And it's this logically contradictory foundation of human sacrifice, blood magic rituals, and existential fear that is arguably the most disturbing aspect of the Christian faith, because it primes its believers to readily accept and justify terrifying violence in the name of the faith. That is not love. That is psychological torture. The God you believe in is an abusive monster, and you followers are its victims, compelled to remain with or consistently return to your abuser out of an indoctrinated fear of death and hell.
Now, could you get behind the idea of a God like that? Would you want to believe in a God like that?
Could I get behind it? No, because I will never again willingly allow myself to be victimized by anyone or anything. And going along with it is tantamount to complicity. Whew, that got a little serious down there at the end. But hey, at least the questions weren't the exact same ones we get every time, over and over. These next questions come from Cameron Bertuzzi over at Capturing Christianity. His focus is the intellectual side of Christian belief, which of course is circular because it begs the question of Christians actually having an intellectual side. Oh, that was so bad. Cameron has a significantly larger channel than I do, and I have enjoyed watching Rationality Rules cover his videos on a number of occasions. Let's see what he's got for us.
So I've got 3 questions that I want to ask atheists, and these aren't gotcha questions.
Oh, déjà vu.
I sincerely want to know, sincerely want to know the answer to these questions.
Cameron, you should know as well as anyone, given your experience, that we are not afraid of your gotcha questions. But you having to preface your video with that caveat kind of demonstrates that you think we are. But I assure you we aren't, because Christians don't have any gotcha questions. All you have are questions that you think providing a satisfactory answer to requires a belief in a God, which further demonstrates that you really don't understand what atheism is.
First question is, do you believe that God does not exist?
Now, for the deistic God answer, I don't believe that exists because I don't accept unfalsifiable hypotheses as explanations. But given the context of the video, I'll assume that Cameron is talking about the Christian God. And it's not that I don't believe it exists. I flat out know it doesn't exist. And that's because the Abrahamic God, as depicted in the Bible, is definitionally a logical contradiction. Logical contradictions can't exist. Ergo, the Abrahamic God does not exist.
If you answered yes to that, then you're ready for the next question.
Wait. Your second question was dependent upon me answering yes to the first question? What if I'd said no? If you prepare your questions in expectation to a particular answer that is obviously leading to something, how is this not intended to be a gotcha?
The next question is, do you believe in evidentialism?
Okay, I think I see where he's going with this. But for clarification, evidentialism is a thesis in epistemology about which beliefs are justified and which ones are not. At the root of it is the principle that one should only ground their beliefs on the relevant evidence that one possesses. That the level of knowledge one has is proportioned to the belief. Philosopher W.K. Clifford, a major proponent of evidentialism, argued in his article, The Ethics of Belief, "It is wrong always, everywhere, and for anyone to believe anything on insufficient evidence. My knowledge that the logically contradictory Abrahamic God does not exist is proportionate to the fact of reality that logical contradictions cannot exist, which is why the Abrahamic God is rejected as a concept outside reality, or non-existent."
Evidentialism is the view that your beliefs ought to be proportioned to the evidence. You shouldn't just believe something without evidence.
Exactly. To do so would be wholly irrational, and in some extreme cases, dangerous.
You answered yes to both of those. If you have the belief that God does not exist, and you also believe in evidentialism, you're ready for the third question. The third question is, what is your evidence that justifies your belief that God does not exist?
Okay, how is this not a setup? Come on, Cameron. It's like I'm standing at the plate listening to you explain to me that you didn't balk after watching you step off the rubber mid-pitch. To be honest, Cameron, that really didn't take 3 questions to get into. You could have just asked what the atheist evidence is that justifies their belief that no God exists. And I already gave you the evidence that justifies my knowledge that the Abrahamic God does not exist. Logical contradictions cannot exist, and your biblical God is definitionally a logical contradiction by virtue of its attributes. But I have a sneaking suspicion, Cameron, given the structure of your questions, that you weren't expecting this particular answer. And that's because the entire video is actually a subtle shifting of the burden of proof to the atheist in an effort to force them to prove a negative. Which means, Cameron, you were dishonest from the jump, because in your worldview, this video is a gotcha. To be honest, I expected more. Let's move on to the last creator, Sean Bradford, and his seemingly dead channel, The Armory. Sean is a fundamentalist Christian, a gamer, and the creator of the web-based biblical apologetics game, The Armory. And while the previous 2 guys had 3 questions, Sean here only has 1. I suspect I'll be able to answer it, but let's see what he's got.
Now, believe it or not, atheism is actually the easiest worldview in the world to refute. It is because of this one question that we're about to uncover.
Really now? Just 1 question and you can refute an entire evidence-based conclusion? This I gotta hear.
Now, this question was actually posed to Jesus by the Pharisees.
Wait a minute. How exactly is an alleged conversation between Jesus and the Pharisees, both of whom are decidedly not atheists, relevant in any way to refuting atheism?
Now, the Pharisees weren't stupid people. They knew how to ask questions and entrap people in their words. And this question is devastating if asked to anyone other than someone who has been sent by God.
Despite the circular reasoning there, and the fact that no methodology exists to determine if a person is or is not sent by God, if the question was derived from a conversation between believers, how is that remotely relevant to atheism? Especially when you can't demonstrate that this conversation ever actually took place anywhere other than your imagination.
Now, we've done a video series, How to Answer Like Jesus.
Technically, you mean how to answer questions the way the people who wrote the Bible would have you think Jesus would answer them.
Now, the context of this question is that Jesus has just entered Jerusalem upon a donkey, revealing himself as the Messiah, fulfilling the prophecy in Daniel chapter 9. He then proceeds to go to the temple and clear it out of the money changers. This is the second time he's done this.
First, the event where Jesus goes full Karen on the Pharisees in the temple is unsubstantiated because the only recording of this event is in the Bible. And you can't use the Bible to substantiate the claims of the Bible. Second, if someone possesses prior knowledge of a prophecy and then deliberately takes steps to make that prophecy come true, it invalidates it as prophecy because it is now self-fulfilling as the person has created the consequences based upon prior knowledge. Which is a very real possibility that Christians cannot eliminate regarding Jesus and the book of Daniel. But get to the question, Sean, because I really want to hear how you found the kill shot for all of atheism.
It's at this point that the Pharisees approach him and ask him this question: by whose authority do you do these things? My friends, that is the question that only God can answer.
Like, seriously? That's the question you think refutes atheism? Maybe you should explain it out some.
And this is where atheism gets in a pickle. And it goes something like this. An atheist comes up to you and says, give me proof that God exists. All you have to do is say, by whose authority are you going to determine the validity of the truth claims that I present to you? Or by whose authority are you demanding that I give you evidence that God exists?
You make the claim that it exists, Sean, so it follows that you would have evidence that justifies the claim. The burden of proof is on the claimant. We're just asking for the evidence. It's not our fault you can't deliver it.
The Bible is riddled with contradictions. By whose authority are you determining what is a contradiction? And by whose authority are you placing an obligation on me to live my life in such a way that I don't embrace contradiction?
Dodge, duck, dip, dive, and dodge.
Seriously, dude. Are you f***ing with me? Do you actually think just dodging the request for evidence refutes atheism? Because technically, by the rules of common discourse, the authority is given by you. You give the authority for people to challenge you when you make the claim. And just because you don't like the fact that you can't present anything in response doesn't justify what is probably the dodgiest answer in all of Dodgington. Like, seriously, man, what the f***? Not only do you do by making the claim, but also the laws of logic, especially when you're claiming that something exists that by its very nature violates those laws. So that's it? Your one question to refute all of atheism is just to dodge away from it by questioning the authority by which the atheist is questioning you? Huh. I'm beginning to understand why you haven't uploaded a video in 2 years. From this point onward in the video, Sean just continues to beat the by whose authority question until it looks like the unlucky pick in a Negan lineup. But that's okay, because it makes this a perfect place to stop and take a breather in my ongoing quest to answer theist questions. But I'll leave you with this final thought. Seeing as how I've recently been spending what would someone argue is way too much time listening to theist questions, indulging their ignorance of the most basic high school subjects, and breaking down their fallacious and irrational reasoning, I've actually come to a somewhat interesting conclusion. First, the questions being posited, with the rare exception, are pretty much the same ones over and over and over again. Second, at this point in the game, if these people don't know that atheists can not only answer these questions, but also debunk the theist's own proposed answers, then someone needs to call Hans Wormhat, because these people are obviously ostriches wearing the skinned faces of their human victims, and then shoving their heads into the sand immediately after dropping a video to avoid the incoming barrage of nuclear rebuttals. And lastly, they know that their own proposed answers are not going to convert anyone who is interested in the truth. So I can only conclude that many of these theists are actually aware that their positions are irrational, that their reasoning is fallacious, and they're constantly engaging with atheists in this manner in order to find the information and maybe even the courage they need to justify finally getting away from the religious group that they're a part of. Now, this, of course, is only my opinion. But if there are some theists out there that happen to see this and are on the fence, I've put a link to Recovering from Religion in the description. It has all the resources and support that you'll need. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. And if you did, please like, share, and subscribe. And hit that bell for notifications. And be sure to leave a comment below. I love reading your responses, and those interactions help with the dreaded algorithm. Don't forget, June is Alzheimer's Awareness Month. A link on how you can support efforts against this terrifying disease is in the description. And if you love scary movies, be sure to check out me and my filmmaker friends over at the Week in Horror podcast, now in our 3rd season. Everything you need to become a channel member here, nab yourself some official Bridge the Divide swag, or support the podcast is in the description below. Once again, thank you all so much for your continued support. And as always, be safe, be excellent to each other, and together, we can bridge the divide.